Hello and welcome to the Gothic Color channel. This video is to introduce my Murmuration design and the skirt that can be made using it. Firstly, let me tell you a few words about the pattern and the design. The pattern is a printout of a half-circle skirt with a yoke, which can be adjusted to fit someone with a maximum waist of about 90 centimeters, that's 35.5 inches, and hips of 114 centimeters, that's 45 inches, all the way down to a child measurement. It is the same pattern as that used with my kitten prance design. The cutting and calculations I did for the yoke and skirt are identical to what I did with the kitten prance design, so I will not be covering this here. If you have not seen my video on that design, you can find the link to it in the description box below. The purpose of today's video is to give you a few suggestions on what else you can do with this pattern. Also, in the description box below I have links to the different sections of the video so you can easily skip ahead to the section you are most interested in, as well as links to my online shops where you can purchase the designs you see in this video. As I mentioned in my kitten prance video, at the maximum hip measurement, this skirt would be about 38 centimeters, 15 inches long from waist to hem, so a mini skirt. If you were to make this skirt for a small child, it could reach floor length, though you can easily make it shorter if you wish to. The Murmuration design used in this video comes in 3 color variations and makes a whimsical novelty skirt showing a silhouetted landscape against a dusky colored background. The design is available on fashionformula.com and on spoonflower.com, and the samplers I received from them are near identical. We have the Murmuration on Rosy Sky, on Lavender Sky, and on Dusky Cyan Sky. Overall, I would say that the only slight difference I can see between the two shops is that the black color on the Fashion Formula samplers seems a bit deeper than that on the Spoonflower ones. I'll show you briefly my online shops to touch on the information I gave in my previous video. Don't worry if the colors you see on screen seem very dark, this is not how the prints come out. I have uploaded photographs of the samplers I received, but I also do recommend you get a sampler on your preferred fabric, as sometimes prints can vary in color depending on the surface they are printed on. If you are interested in ordering one of the patterns from one of my shops, let me point out 2 things. Firstly, the pattern is meant to be printed on 1 meter of fabric, and secondly, the fabric needs to have a minimum of printable width of 140 centimeters, that's 55.25 inches. Fashion Formula has meters as a standard measurement, so you just need to pick this, and the width of the fabric can be seen next to the title of each type of fabric. If you were to order from Spoonflower, you can change the amount of fabric here, and you can find the width of each fabric under the title of each. I'll pick the cotton sateen so you can see the whole design appearing on the preview. If the fabric measurements have come up on your computer as inches and yards, you can change this here, where you can also change the country, language and currency. Down here you'll see you can get the option between yards and meters. A yard is shorter than a meter, so if you were to pick the yards, you would end up with part of the pattern cut off. So if the measurements on this website have automatically come up on your computer as yards, you can easily change them to meters, and then, of course, you can also change them back to yards afterwards if you want that as your default. Ignore what it says in this blue box about the minimum width. If you need a reminder for the minimum width, you can find this information if you scroll down and click on More under the About the Design section. Right, so now we start with the construction of the skirt. I am using the Lavender Sky variant of the design printed on organic cotton sateen. I am making it with an invisible zip, interface and lining, and I am making it at round about the maximum size that this pattern allows. I washed, dried and ironed the fabric to shrink it to its proper size so that it is ready for cutting. I cut the skirt section and left it to stretch on the bias, just as I did with the kitten prance design. I also cut and prepared the yoke pieces in the same way as I did in my previous video. Once all that was sorted, I cut pieces of interfacing, which I ironed onto the exterior pieces of the yoke before sewing them up. Once I had the exterior of the yoke ready, I iron pressed the seams into position and sewed on the skirt. I then moved on to the lining. I bought some plain white fabric which I sewed up to match the size of the exterior of the skirt, and, just to be a bit extra, I added a thin section of black fabric at the hem. Once the lining of the skirt was ready, I sewed it onto the lining of the yoke. I then moved on to the invisible zip. I started by sewing one of the sides of the zip onto the exterior of the skirt. Once I finished, I zipped it up and marked on the zipper tape where I needed to sew it on the other side so that the pattern and seams matched across. If you need detailed information on how to sew an invisible zip, I have added links to 2 good tutorials I found on YouTube in the description box below. They are slightly different methods on how to deal with installing an invisible zipper, so you can choose which works best for you. You can hem the skirt normally, but I decided to add a few things to the edge of the skirt. Since I was working at the maximum size of the skirt and therefore the skirt was a mini, I decided to add a little bit of length by adding a black velvet ribbon to the hem. To embellish this further, I hand-stitched a black decorative ribbon on the seam between the sateen and the velvet. Next, I dealt with sewing up the back of the skirt. First, I matched the design at the end of the hem and pasted it. I then sewed it up using black thread. Next, I basted the rest of the seam and sewed it up using white thread. You do not need to use different colored thread for different sections of the design. You can match your thread to the color of the background of the design instead. Next, I basted the lining of the yoke to the exterior at the top part of the skirt and I sewed it up. I turned the skirt the right way around and pressed it. I then opened it up again and understitched the seam allowance to the lining. Once I finished that, I started pinning the lining onto the zipper tape, making sure all seam allowances were tucked into the yoke. I turned the skirt outside out to check that the lining was sitting nicely within the exterior of the yoke. After a few adjustments, I turned the skirt the wrong way out and carefully sewed the lining onto the zipper tape. Once I finished that, I turned the skirt the right way out again. I hand-stitched the bottom of the yoke to the lining using the seam allowances so that the stitch could not be seen at the front. To finish off the skirt, I washed, dried and ironed it. As you can see, there are various ways that you can use this pattern to give it a different finish. If you decide to make this skirt for yourself, do send me pictures of what you made and I'll pin them on my Pinterest account. I am planning to make a simpler pattern for a 1 meter fabric skirt as well as a pattern for a top. Hopefully I'll be able to have videos on these in the next few months. In the meantime, do subscribe and click on notifications so you get notified of my next upload. Goodbye!